February 6, 1978. A typical winter day across Ontario and Quebec, until weather forecasters spotted a collision brewing over the Great Lakes. Picture this: Toronto buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour. And southern Ontario completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. But how did modern forecasting, armed with satellites and radar, miss the true scale of the danger? The answer lies in a blizzard that would test even winter-hardened Canadians like never before. Use a lot of real footage and dramatic music. Picture this: Toronto buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour. And southern Ontario completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. In early February 1978, life in southern Ontario and Quebec followed its usual winter rhythm. Streets were busy with morning commuters, children trudged to school, and shopkeepers swept thin layers of snow from their doorsteps. Weather bulletins on February 5th spoke of cold, but nothing out of the ordinary, just another week in a Canadian winter. Behind the scenes, meteorologists at the Toronto Weather Centre were noticing subtle signs. Satellite images showed a powerful low-pressure system rising from the American Midwest, drawing up moisture as it tracked toward the Great Lakes. At the same time, a mass of Arctic air was pushing south, dense and frigid, settling over northern Ontario and Quebec. One system was pushing up from the American Midwest, another swirling down from the Arctic. When they collided, they created a meteorological monster. On the afternoon of February 6th, shift logs at Environment Canada recorded the first convergence alert. Weather models, still in their early computer age, began flashing warnings of a possible collision over the lakes. The radar screens pulsed with growing intensity. Forecasters exchanged notes, comparing satellite loops and teletype model charts. They recognized the ingredients for a major storm: two systems on a collision course with a blocking high to the north, trapping everything in place. The public, however, remained largely unaware. The evening news mentioned a potential snowstorm, but no one expected anything beyond the usual. In homes and offices, radios played quietly as people made dinner or finished paperwork. Few paid much attention to the technical jargon. Terms like rapid cyclogenesis or bombing low sounded abstract and distant. Yet in the weather offices, a sense of unease was growing. Forecast discussions grew more urgent. Some meteorologists, recalling false alarms from earlier in the winter, hesitated to sound the strongest warnings. Others pressed for more direct language, worried by the deepening low and tightening isobars over the Great Lakes. The models showed heavy snow, high winds, and the potential for blizzard conditions, but the true scale was difficult to pin down. As darkness fell on February 6th, the city lights of Toronto and Montreal glowed beneath a sky that gave no hint of what was coming. In those quiet hours, the perfect ingredients were lining up for a storm that would soon rewrite the meaning of winter in Canada. Picture this: Toronto buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour, and southern Ontario completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. Use a lot of real footage and dramatic music. By the late 1970s, Canadian meteorologists had access to modern forecasting technology that just a decade earlier would have seemed like science fiction. Weather satellites orbited above, relaying images of cloud patterns and storm systems in near real time. Radar installations along the Great Lakes scanned for precipitation, tracking the first signs of snow bands as they swept in from the west. Computer models, still in their early years, crunched atmospheric data, producing maps and charts that hinted at the scale of approaching storms. At Environment Canada, forecasters pieced together satellite snapshots, radar echoes, and teletype printouts from these models, searching for patterns that could warn of trouble ahead. But even with these tools, predicting the full force of a winter storm in 1978 was far from straightforward. The computer models ran on grids so coarse that local details were easily lost. Their calculations could flag a low-pressure system deepening over the Midwest, or a surge of Arctic air pressing south. But the exact path, speed, and intensity of the storm often remained uncertain until hours before impact. Meteorologists knew a collision was possible, two powerful systems converging over the Great Lakes, with a blocking high to the north trapping the storm in place. The models showed snow, wind, and the risk of blizzard conditions. But how much snow? How strong would the winds get? Would it be another false alarm or something truly historic? Forecast discussions grew tense as February 6th wore on. Some forecasters remembered recent storms that fizzled out after dramatic warnings and hesitated to issue the most severe alerts. Others, watching the deepening low on satellite and radar, felt a growing urgency. The data pointed to a dangerous setup, but the models simply could not capture the local extremes, how lake effect bands might stack up, or how winds might funnel through city streets. In the end, warnings were issued, but with a note of caution. The public was told to expect heavy snow and strong winds, but the true scale was hidden in the gaps between data points and the limits of 1970s technology. In the days that followed, the storm would be remembered in local media and weather circles as the Great Canadian Blizzard of 1978. It became the event that exposed both the power of modern forecasting and its limits. No one could say they had not seen it coming. But no one, not even the most experienced meteorologists, had predicted just how overwhelming it would be. At 6 p.m. on February 6th, the first wave hit. The temperature dropped, and the wind began to howl, tearing through city streets and open fields with gusts that topped 100 kilometers an hour. In a matter of minutes, what had been a typical winter evening turned into chaos. Commuters still on the roads found themselves driving headlights swallowed by sheets of snow that seemed to come from every direction at once. Visibility vanished. Cars slowed, then stopped, taillights flickering uselessly in the whiteout. On open stretches of highway, the wind blasted snow across the pavement so fiercely that even snowplows struggled to keep moving. Picture this: Toronto, buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal, with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour. And southern Ontario, completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. In the cities, people looked out their windows and saw nothing but swirling white. The street lights cast only faint halos through the blizzard. Downtown, office towers rattled in the gale, and the sound of sirens echoed through empty streets as emergency vehicles tried to reach stranded motorists. Reports began to come in: cars abandoned at intersections, buses stuck in drifts, families trapped only blocks from home. Radio stations interrupted regular programming with urgent bulletins: stay off the roads, shelter in place, do not attempt to travel. In the suburbs and rural towns, the storm arrived with even less warning. Power lines snapped under the weight of wind-driven snow, plunging neighborhoods into darkness. Farmhouses disappeared behind walls of drifting snow, and entire communities lost contact with the outside world. The wind roared on, hour after hour, as the storm tightened its grip. By midnight, it was clear this was no ordinary blizzard. Southern Ontario and Quebec had lost control, swept under by a force of nature that would not let go. Picture this: Toronto, buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal, with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour. and southern Ontario completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. By dawn on February 7th, the true scale of the storm revealed itself. Municipal crews ventured out as the first light crept over the city, only to find entire neighborhoods transformed. Snowfall measurements from Environment Canada stations left no doubt. Toronto recorded 60 centimeters, London hit 65 centimeters, and Hamilton approached 55 centimeters. For most, these numbers were hard to grasp until they opened their doors and faced walls of white. In the suburbs, snowdrifts towered 4 to 5 meters high, higher than a city bus, higher than the ground floor of many homes. Cars vanished beneath sculpted ridges, their shapes barely visible under the weight. Buses sat abandoned, swallowed up to their windows, while sidewalks disappeared completely. Crews, tasked with clearing main roads, found their equipment overwhelmed. Plows stalled or became stuck, their blades unable to push through the dense, wind-packed drifts. In some places, operators reported that snowbanks blocked entire intersections, cutting off access to whole blocks. Attempts to reach outlying neighborhoods were met with impassable streets and buried street signs. Even major arteries, those cleared hourly in a normal storm, were now indistinguishable from the rest of the landscape, marked only by the faint outlines of lamp posts and the occasional stranded vehicle. The numbers told a story that words struggled to capture. 60 centimeters in Toronto meant a city stopped in its tracks. 65 centimeters in London meant driveways, sidewalks, and even porches erased overnight. With drifts reaching 4 or 5 meters in exposed areas, movement became impossible. For city workers and emergency crews, the challenge shifted from routine snow clearing to a battle against an unyielding, ever-growing mass. By the morning of February 7th, the scale of the blizzard was no longer theoretical. It was measured in buried vehicles, vanished roads, and the stunned silence that settled over streets where nothing could move. Picture this: Toronto, buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal, with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour, and southern Ontario completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. Highway 401, usually a lifeline stretching across southern Ontario, turned into a graveyard of stranded vehicles. By the evening of February 6th, traffic had slowed to a crawl, then stopped altogether. Snowdrifts packed tightly around cars, trucks, and buses, trapping thousands in place. Plows that tried to break through became stuck themselves, their orange lights barely visible in the swirling white. Entire stretches of the highway vanished beneath wind-blown snow, with vehicles abandoned mid-lane, doors frozen shut, and drivers forced to seek shelter wherever they could. The paralysis was not limited to the highways. Geo-transit trains ground to a halt, with passengers stranded between stations, some left waiting overnight in dark, unheated cars. In Toronto, the TTC struggled as buses disappeared beneath drifts and streetcar lines froze solid. Even the subway, usually a refuge from winter, saw stations shuttered and service cut back. Pearson International Airport joined the list. Flights canceled, runways buried, terminals crowded with travelers unable to leave. For more than 2 days, the airport's operations barely flickered, the hum of jet engines replaced by the muffled silence of snow. VIA rail trains, too, sat motionless on the tracks, their schedules erased by the storm. Across Canada's most populated corridor, movement simply stopped. Families were separated, commuters stranded far from home, and rescue crews faced a maze of impassable roads. For 72 hours, Toronto and much of southern Ontario were cut off. Streets were empty, engines stilled, every system meant to keep the city moving brought to a standstill. Picture this: Toronto buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour, and southern Ontario completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. The storm's devastation was measured not only in snowdrifts, but in lives lost. Across Ontario and Quebec, coroner reports and news accounts tallied around 20 storm-related deaths, making this one of the deadliest winter disasters in Canadian memory. Some victims were found alone in their vehicles, engines long since stalled, snow packed tight around doors and exhaust pipes. In the whiteout, others tried to walk for help, only to collapse just blocks from safety, their bodies discovered by rescue teams days later. Carbon monoxide poisoning claimed several lives as people ran their car engines for warmth, unaware that drifting snow had blocked tailpipes. Heart attacks struck down men and women shoveling dense, wind-packed snow, their efforts to clear driveways turning fatal in the biting cold. Yet the same storm that took so much also revealed a different side of the country. Strangers opened their doors to motorists stranded on highways and back roads. Restaurants and corner stores became makeshift shelters, serving hot meals and coffee to anyone who needed them, no questions asked, no bills presented. Volunteers with snowmobiles and four-wheel drives ferried medicine and blankets to the elderly and sick, braving conditions that even emergency crews could not reach. In apartment towers, neighbors gathered in heated lobbies, sharing food and stories as the storm raged outside. The blizzard exposed the fragility of daily life, but it also sparked a wave of solidarity that carried communities through the darkest hours. Families mourned, but thousands survived, because ordinary people refused to let the storm have the final word. Picture this: Toronto, buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal, with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour. And southern Ontario, completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. On February 7th, the scale of the disaster forced Ontario's government to act. Premier Bill Davis issued an emergency declaration, unlocking extraordinary powers for provincial officials. With local resources overwhelmed, the province requested help from Ottawa. Within hours, Canadian Forces units were mobilized. Soldiers arrived in southern Ontario, driving armored personnel carriers, snowcats, and heavy military trucks, machines built for war, now pressed into service against snow and ice. The operation quickly became known as Operation Snow Removal. Army convoys rumbled through silent city streets, headlights cutting through the swirling white. Crews worked around the clock, clearing major arteries and opening access to hospitals and emergency centers. Soldiers went door to door in neighborhoods cut off by drifts, delivering food, medicine, and reassurance to residents who had not seen a plow in days. For many, the sight of military vehicles outside their homes was both shocking and strangely comforting. A reminder that even in peacetime, the country could rally its full strength when the situation demanded it. Across Toronto, Hamilton, and dozens of smaller towns, the lines between civilian and military blurred as everyone pitched in to dig out and take care of the vulnerable. The storm had brought Canada to a standstill, but now the response was underway. Picture this: Toronto, buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal, with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour. And southern Ontario, completely shut down for over a week. The financial toll of the blizzard stunned provincial leaders and economists alike. Ontario's Ministry of Finance calculated direct losses and cleanup costs at over $400 million in 1978 dollars, more than $2 billion today. Across southern Ontario and Quebec, the storm wiped out a week of economic activity. Stock markets stalled, factories sat empty, and thousands of small businesses faced missed paychecks and spoiled goods. Utility companies logged more than 200,000 power outages as ice and wind snapped lines faster than crews could repair them. For days, entire neighborhoods shivered in homes without heat, while hydro teams worked round the clock in sub-zero wind chills to restore electricity. The logistics of snow removal reached a scale never seen before. Toronto alone hauled away an estimated 400,000 truckloads of snow, filling parks, parking lots, and even dumping tons into Lake Ontario. Cleanup dragged on for weeks, with mountains of dirty snow lingering into April. Meanwhile, the same storm system battered New England, dropping 27 inches on Boston and paralyzing cities across the American Northeast. Yet, while U.S. headlines immortalized the blizzard of 1978, the Canadian experience was just as catastrophic, affecting millions and rewriting the rules for urban winter survival. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. Picture this: Toronto buried under 60 centimeters of snow in 24 hours. Montreal with winds screaming at 110 kilometers per hour. And southern Ontario completely shut down for over a week. This was the winter that brought Canada to a standstill. As climate volatility grows, these extremes are no longer just history, they're a warning. How we prepare now decides whether the next blizzard is disaster or resilience. Stay ready. Share your memories or thoughts below.